Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the What the Research Says, Digital Privacy in Libraries as Digital Literacy webinar with James Henry Smith, the J Visiting Information Literacy Librarian at IU Bloomington. My name is George Bergstrom, and I'm the Southwest Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be the question moderator for today. I'd like to start off the webinar with a few quick announcements. To register for other webinars or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library. This session is 1 hour, so you'll get 1 LEU for today. If you're watching the archived recording of this webinar, the instructions on how to obtain your LEU are available in the video's description on YouTube. Or you can also find those instructions on the Indiana State Library's continuing education site under the LEU policies. I will now turn it over to James Henry.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. All right, so before I dive in, I'll just introduce myself a little bit. So my name is James Henry Smith. I am currently serving as the Information Literacy Librarian for Online Learning. I take that job title very expansively, and meaning that I both teach online and create online learning objects for the university, but then I also take it as meaning to teach people how to learn for themselves online. And so that's where digital privacy and digital literacy start to come in. So I'd like to start today with a little bit of an anecdote as to how I got into caring about digital privacy. So I believe it was last May, I was at Monroe County Public Library getting some books for some leisure reading. It happened to glance on the shelf, this book by Carissa Velez, Privacy is Power, Why and How You Should Take Back Control of Your Data. So over the course of May, I was kind of flipping through it, didn't really commit to reading it yet, you know how you get those books from the library. But in early June, I had a conference that I had to attend up in Toronto. And so I decided to check this book out on Libby and listen to it on that long drive. And while I was driving, I had my iPhone plugged into the rental car with Libby playing and Google Maps up on the screen. And while I was listening to this book and driving, I realized just how much data that I was giving away by just this simple act of listening to an audiobook while I drove. I was giving away the location data, my Google Maps destination. So I was telling whoever was accessing this data exactly which hotel I was staying at, my Google email, and the email that I was have connected to my Libby account, as well as my phone number, and any data associated with Google, Libby, Apple, and my usage data about this. So I bring this up as kind of a serendipitous beginning to this work that I've embarked on. And I find it interesting that I just happened to find it on a shelf in a physical way. So this was completely unmediated by digital algorithms and recommendations that people often use in people often use the data that's collected about them to get personalized recommendations. And so this is one way where that actually is subverted by just a serendipitous beginning. So I'll go back to some of these concepts in this quick anecdote throughout the talk. And here's a quick roadmap of what I'll be talking about. So start with just a grounding reason as why we as librarians should care about digital privacy, and then move on to talking about 3 different case studies that I embarked on throughout the summer and last fall. One of them was an online library guide that I created that was just some reading lists and best practices that I found as I started to go into a deeper dive after reading this book, and then a sample workshop that I did at Monroe County Public Library with one of my colleagues, and then kind of a reprise of this at Wells Library, my home library at Indiana University, with a privacy analyst and a PhD candidate in information science. And then once I go through those 3 case studies, and I'll be sharing the resources that I used for each of these, we'll talk about future directions that you all can undertake at your libraries, and as time allows, discuss some potential implications of embarking in this kind of digital privacy work. So why should we care about privacy in libraries? My favorite thing to go back to is Article 7 of the ALA's Library Bill of Rights. I'll read it real quick. All people, regardless of origin, age, background, or views, possess a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. Libraries should advocate for, educate about, and protect people's privacy, safeguarding all library use data, including personally identifiable information. So when I worked at Monroe County Public Library before I embarked in this position, we talked about library patron privacy in a physical sense of not talking to teenagers' parents about what books they're checking out, protecting privacy in what people are checking out in a physical medium. But we didn't talk too terribly much about some of the privacy implications of using some of our online vended resources. And so I found that that was kind of a gap in the conversation that was happening. And so this talk is kind of a way to fill that gap. And we'll get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of that here in the first case study. But before we do that, I'm gonna define some key terms so that we can see how these build up on each other and can create some kind of startlingly accurate depictions of our users just from their usage data. So some key terms when you're looking into the literature about digital privacy and digital privacy practices are data exhaust, cookies, and data brokers. So data exhaust is a term for all of the accidental data that we're creating through just using any digital product. So these are things like session information. If you open up an app and then close it, that is often recorded as how much time you spent on the app. Things like on Instagram when you like something or how much you watch of a TikTok before swiping up. These are all data points based off of our behavior that we're not intentionally creating, but are going out into the internet and giving little snippets of information about us. One example of data exhaust are cookies. So you notice that anytime you visit a website, a little pop-up shows up and either just tells you that they're collecting cookies about your visit to that website, or often for internationally oriented websites, they will often offer options for what cookies you will accept and which ones you will reject. So cookies are one of those things we often see, but I've come to realize we don't have a very firm understanding of what that actually means or is. So a cookie is basically just a text file that has data about your visit to that website. So if you go into a site that offers options for what cookies to accept and which ones to decline, they'll often be broken down into something like functional cookies, targeting or third-party cookies. Those are the two ones that I concern myself with the most, but there's often like 3 to 4 different options in there as well. A lot of it says something about functionality, how well the website is running, but those third-party or targeting cookies are saved and then shared with these entities called data brokers that collect all of your information. Sorry, going back to cookies for a second. One of the main data points that's collected is your IP address, which then can be used to connect you as a user to your computer or your device. And that can be one of the personal identifying information that you're accidentally exhausting out every time you use a website. And so data brokers collect all of these cookies, all of the data points that you just accidentally leave out there, and create profiles based off of that they can then sell to advertisers to get more targeted advertising. So this is, I very purposely put in a network off to the right-hand side because these data points can then be collected, aggregated to anything that has information that can be tied back to a single entity. So like I mentioned, just by plugging in my phone to a rental car and pulling up Google Maps and Libby, I was sharing my phone number, which can be pulled back to directly me because I'm the only person that uses that phone number, as well as my email addresses. And so having those data points all linked to one single entity, they can then pull things like my Kroger card, which has data about what I purchase, which then can be used to put into my data profile that will be much more useful to advertisers to get me to purchase certain things or act in certain ways. So this is one way that digital privacy and not adhering to best practices in, I would say, can lead to difference in behaviors. And so that's why I frame this as a digital literacy issue, because digital literacy is the ability to use digital tools in an informed way. And so by accepting or declining cookies, that's one way of having informed consent around what I am actually associating with myself versus what I don't want associated with me. Much like in my workshops that I did, I relied on a physical metaphor of closing the blinds at my house. I can decide when I want my blinds open where people can look into my house and have that level of privacy there versus when I want to close the blinds so people can't see in. Accepting and declining cookies follows that same kind of line of thought. So before diving into some of the case studies and workshops that I embarked on, I'd like for us to play a little game that I think really underscores that when we're talking about digital privacy practices, it's not about perfection and creating a perfectly closed blind, if you will. It's about progress and making steps to close them as much as you can. So I'll go ahead and share this in the chat and give us all a few minutes to play this. And if you feel comfortable doing so, go ahead and throw your score into the chat so we can all see how we're doing. I think this is a pretty good opening activity because it shows that the ways that user experience designers for websites often create what are called dark patterns to kind of trick us into accepting terms and conditions that we wouldn't otherwise use. So even if we have this information of why we don't want to accept all cookies, the information that is in a cookie is quite valuable. And so web developers will purposely try and get us to share that as well. So I will give my voice, let's say 3 to 4 minutes of rest while you all engage in this wonderfully infuriating game. Allison shared that I feel like I'm in the labyrinth. One of us tells the truth and the other always tells lies. Ooh. IoT is preventing me from accessing it. What is IoT, if you wouldn't mind explaining that?
Indiana Office of Technology.
Ah, thank you.
Mhm. You could probably share the link in the chat if you want people to play on their own.
Oh, yes, I did that at the beginning.
Okay,
I'll share it
sorry.
again. Oh, you're good. Because if you missed it, then other people probably did as well. Ooh. So for folks who can't access it, I can do a couple of these. So Brian just shared in the chat, and when you click the wrong one, it feels like you've been hacked, and that's a pretty good, good kind of affective response to this, where when you accidentally agree to something that you don't want to agree to, it does have that feeling like you've been wronged in some way, or someone's taking something from you, which is definitely a disturbing feeling to have to sit with every time you want to use a website. So this one is fairly manipulative as well of do you want to or no, and then imply something bad about you for not wanting to give away your data. Again, this goes back to when you want to uncheck anything but functional cookies, you have to click through all of these buttons that sometimes change because the buttons are so small. This is demonstrating that kind of idea where eventually you just accept some cookies because it's a frustrating experience. So this one here is, we'll assume you agree to the terms and conditions. This is a pretty common one where it just shows when you go to a website that that they are collecting cookies about you. And if you continue to use the website, the assumption is that you agree to the terms and conditions. And if you want to go and change, it gets quite frustrating going into the settings of the website. All right, so in the interest of time, because again, this talk is just going at scratching the surface of this kind of deep labyrinth, if you will, of practices and information about how data works in our life. I'm gonna go ahead and close this real quick. so that it stops making noises at us. Oh, nice. Some of the responses are coming in. All right, so a couple of people did actually fairly well, where it's saying between 3 and 7 attempts, 10, 9. Chatbot assistance, so goodness, that has growing implications. Yeah, so I'm saying no one did perfectly in that, which kind of underscores this point of even when we as information professionals know that we're trying not to accept the terms and conditions, it's quite challenging, if not impossible, to do it perfectly the whole time. And so as we talk to our patrons about this, kind of sitting with that empathy of we can do our best, but it might not always be perfect every time. We can't necessarily protect our privacy every single time that we want to. And so that's a good kind of grounding in the feelings of it all. Yeah, so I love Lawrence's question of, so did the game site collect some of our data? And let me pull that back up and see where we can find that information. So I went to this upper corner to find some more information about this and start to try and find those answers, which is the kind of critical thinking that we have to do when engaging in this kind of work. So this is done with inspiration. That didn't exactly tell us what we wanted to. I believe at the end, when you get your score, there's other links that you can click on as well. All right, here's where it was also shared in The Guardian. All right, so I'm gonna move on to some of the case studies now. So the first thing that I did last summer after doing, thank you, Lou. They just shared that it says disclaimer, the game does not extract real data. So they're not pulling your IP or any of that kind of information in there as well. I'm glad that somebody found that in there. Okay, so when I finished reading Privacy is Power, I was looking for some more information and wanting to share this with some of the folks at IU in part of my job as an online learning librarian. And so with that, I created a LibGuide through SpringShare that had some reading lists and some tools to explore. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this in the chat for you all to explore as you'd like. And I'll demonstrate some of the things that some of the design choices that I actually made. And so with here, this is the landing page. Hey, picture of me. It's very exciting. So this does some of the grounding work that I started this talk with data exhaust and incidental data creation. And kind of the crux of this in all the work that I've done is by informing yourself of how these patterns work and why data and digital privacy matters, is empowering yourself to make some more decisions based off of informed consent. So I broke this down into digital privacy practices, book list, and privacy in libraries. So in the practices, I broke this down into a couple different ones where you can actually increase your digital privacy by choosing which browser to work off of. And like with everything, when it comes to this type of work, it exists on a spectrum. So I included things on Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, and Tor, which in my eyes, also exists on a spectrum where Google Chrome is owned by Google, which is a major data aggregator. Mozilla Firefox is run by a nonprofit, and so they have less incentive to share your data. And then Tor is an onion router that specifically is built to disentangle. I'm not quite sure what word I'm looking for here, but by separating, there we go, your identifiable information from the routing information that the web browser chooses. So I talked through web browsers and then extensions that you can add to each web browser, such as Privacy Possum, Privacy Badger, and uBlock Origin. Something that's great about uBlock Origin is it also blocks ads. So it's not only working to get advertisers to not have as much information about you, but it also creates a shield from certain ads to be shown to the end user. And so with each of these, I also added a dig deeper, and I want to pull up to the web browser because I mentioned that Firefox is run by a nonprofit, and incidentally, so is Tor. But Google Chrome is from a for-profit, or is owned by Alphabet Inc., which is a for-profit entity. And because I'm at a university that pays for expensive databases, and this is the end user is for IU students. I do link to some proprietary databases for them to go and look up some of the company information. So using this as a jumping off point to dig deeper and start investigating some of the entities that may be collecting data about you. So there's that reciprocity, or at least a sense thereof. All right, I'll just show a little bit of the book list because this is a topic that can be talked about at multiple different levels, all the way from like the data science and creation of different digital tools, all the way down to the vernacular. I included books at IU libraries. And then I also included information about how to get books that are written at less of an academic register and more at a personal leisure reading. And so I also linked to the Monroe County Public Library and gave a little bit of information on how to get a public library, because all of our university students do qualify for a public library card here in Monroe County. So definitely take a look at some of these books and see if your system has them as well. And then I do want to spend a little bit of time talking through digital privacy in libraries. So I started this talk by quoting the Library of Bill of Rights here. And I also want to point out that the ALA does support privacy efforts through field guides for digital security and many other field guides. So if you haven't looked through any of these, I'll go ahead and share this first one in the chat. Highly recommended as you start investigating how to do this in your own library. But here, because I mentioned Libby at the top, the Library Freedom Project actually created a vendor privacy scorecard where they look at the terms and conditions for some of the major library vendors and the privacy practices that they engage in. So you can see that it's done through on a 3-point kind of qualitative scale, where they do good privacy practices, questionable, and risky. And you'll notice that no one does good privacy practices all the way across. So this has implications for us as librarians as we encourage users to look through these library databases and can help create some of the informed consent around there as well. So this is quite a small table, and it was published in 2018. So it's 6 years old at this point. So I recommend doing a little bit more digging. The exception of LexisNexis, this was a fairly recent study that came out where this library vendor was selling user data to Immigration and Customs Enforcement to look at patterns about what people are researching and implications about their involvement in potentially illicit activities, which goes counter to some of the ethos of the ALA's mandate for protecting patron privacy. So down here, there are some organizations like the Library Freedom Project dedicated specifically to increasing digital privacy. We got the Library Freedom Project, the Data Shred Privacy Toolkit, which was created by Sarah Hartman Caverly and Alexis Chisholm. It offers a toolkit for teaching data privacy, as well as the Electronic Frontier Foundation's surveillance self-defense. The Electronic Frontier Foundation are the developers of it's either Privacy Possum or Privacy Badger. So you can look at some of the digital privacy practices that they suggest, as well as you click through this LibGuide. So that was my jumping off point. I realized that something static and something that people have to kind of discover and opt into doesn't necessarily get into the deep work. Kind of as an example, I do have my contact in here, and as of yet, no one has contacted me specifically about this LibGuide, even though it has several hundred views at this point. So I wanted to do some of that more deep work as well. And so that's when I contacted a friend and colleague who works at Monroe County Public Library about doing a collaborative program there. So a little bit of background to me: before I came to IU Libraries, I did a very brief stint at Monroe County Public Library. And from working at the desk, I realized where the general public's digital literacy skills actually lied, and had several conversations with my colleague, Jack Kowaleski, about how we can increase people's digital literacy skills. And so this conversation kept going after I switched positions and was talking about this deep dive that I was doing about digital privacy. And through that, we started having several conversations about how to do this kind of workshop and program at the public library. And this was actually quite a challenge because at the public library, there's a whole range of abilities and know-how. And so being able to develop a workshop that could speak to all of those different abilities was quite a challenge because there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done so that everybody's on the same page here. So here's just kind of a breakdown of what this 60-minute workshop ended up being. It was started out with some conversation about why privacy and more generally is important and the steps that people take. Again, this is where the windows and blinds metaphor was really quite useful to get some of the older folks in the workshop to create that kind of analogy in their head, develop a schema around digital privacy. And then we started to bring this into the world of the digital. And so that's where we brought in the work of the data detox kit. Go ahead and share this in here. So this is quite a robust kit. You can see they work on privacy, security, well-being, and misinformation. So this one is just one page, control your smartphone data. And we actually pulled up and printed out this handout that is published under a Creative Commons license. Yeah, of course. I'm just about to pop it in the chat, Kathy. And then also share the data detox kit as well. So these, the data detox kit is shared under a Creative Commons license that is attribution, non-commercial, and no derivatives. So you can feel free to print out these handouts as is and share them with folks in your library as more of a passive program as you'd like. So we can see, oops. This actually has 5 steps, and because it's an hour-long program with a variety of skills and abilities, we actually focused on steps 2 and 3 of this handout. And so we gave participants about 20 minutes to go through the list of apps that they had on their phone, because each app allows for certain permissions in just by using the app. And so for the ones that you're no longer using, they might be randomly collecting data from you that you're not aware of. So deleting unused apps are a great way to start closing some of those blinds. And then we focused on clearing location data. And that's where the conversation around informed consent and ability to decide which apps you're going to allow location data for, because everything is kind of a cost benefit analysis in this realm. So we had a great conversation in that program about whether or not to allow Instagram to have your location data. And we had both viewpoints shared in there, where it's like, well, there's no reason for every time I open this app for me to be sharing where I'm opening it from. So I'm going to go ahead and take off the location permissions in my phone's app settings. But another person liked to post pictures about local restaurants or places that they're at as a way to advertise for them and increase the visibility of that small business that they cared about. And so allowing for location data for this app was actually a useful thing that they wanted to be sharing out. So that's why that person decided to keep the location, allowing for location services for that specific app. And so that's one of the great conversations that we can have by opening up these types of workshops in a public setting, is deciding, okay, when am I going to share my location data and when I'm not? When am I going to keep my blinds open and when should I shut them? And so that was one quite useful takeaway from this experience. So moving on in time a little bit, about 2 weeks later, I ran a very similar workshop in Wells Library in an academic setting, where the messaging was pretty similar, but my collaborator was an academic rather than a library practitioner, and my participants in that workshop skewed way younger, where I could make some assumptions about their level of digital privacy. So the groundwork was quite different. Here's an example of some of the publicity that we sent out. I worked with AJ Musel, who is a privacy analyst at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and she is also a PhD candidate in information science. I got connected with her because she had last year done a study about digital privacy practices among LGBT app users and whether they consider digital privacy in when they share their location data with certain apps or not. And that was an interesting qualitative study because she actually went and did semi-structured interviews with survey participants and found that people don't really consider digital privacy. And so that kind of gave us a sense of, oh, there's work to be done here. She also worked with a group called Privacy by Design. We'll go ahead and share through their work. And we actually used some of the infographics that they had created as a jumping off point. So we'll go ahead and share this, and then I'll talk about this infographic specifically. So Catherine asked, does turning off data rather than completely removing the app in the app settings work to protect your data? So this is one of those, yes, but maybe not as completely as we would like. So by turning off location services for Instagram doesn't allow them to get the exact metadata of the photo, but there can be other ways that can be worked around so that they still have your location data by where you accessed the app. And so it kind of creates, again, going back to that blind metaphor, if you're using horizontal blinds, it kind of creates it so that the angle, so you can see less of it, but you can still kind of see through the window, if that metaphor tracks. So it does a little bit to protect some of the data, but there are still workarounds in how metadata works in sharing photos online and accessing the internet online. So yes, but not as much as we would hope. And so in this workshop I did at Wells Library, we actually started out with that terms and conditions game that we started out with today. Again, for the same reasons as, all right, there's a lot of work that we can do to protect some of our digital privacy, but things will slip through the cracks consistently. And so deciding what to prioritize and which information that we care about. Oh, I should point out that the link that I just shared in the Privacy by Design link in the resources, you have to scroll about halfway down to get to the infographics that are shared. Again, these are done through a Creative Commons license under the same no derivatives in non-commercial, so you can use them in your library, but remixing them, you'll have to share them as they currently exist. So after we did the terms and conditions game in this workshop, we decided to have a whole conversation about what categories of information there are and where does our privacy matter most. So this one talks about some of your internal ideas, external characteristics about you, whether that be your physical self, behaviors, or even identity information, such as age, ethnicity, orientation, things like that. And so here they point out some of the more sensitive personal information within the within this infographic, and that means that some of this sensitive information can be used against you or can out you as a member of a potentially marginalized or marginalizable group. And so in this, there was a conversation that luckily for me as the facilitator went back to location information. And so that led well into the same activity I did in the public library space, where we did an app audit to delete unused apps and deciding not just in location data, but in sharing of your location for each app, but then also with microphone and camera settings as well. So some apps will allow you to do text to speech, nope, other way around, speech to text. And so they will need access to the microphone. But that also means that sometimes when you open the app, you're allowing your microphone to be accessed just by using the app. And so again, it comes down to, okay, how much am I getting out of this lack of privacy in allowing for this feature on my phone versus how much will I have to pay for, or how much inconvenience will I experience by not allowing it. So in this realm, we talked about types of information that is about you as a person, and not only location data, but also microphone settings. All of this kind of comes back to what information and data can be accessed through your digital devices. So those last 15 minutes, like to talk through different options, and definitely invite you to pop more questions into the chat so we can have kind of a one-sided conversation, or if there wants to be side conversations in the chat, fully welcome that. So going back to this idea that privacy is power, and knowledge is power. So knowledge about privacy kind of has a twofer in there. So these first two of passive programming and active workshops are demonstrated in some of the case studies that I just talked through. Where, so like I did an online library guide, which I just set up and then sent out and advertised as much as I could through our digital channels. But ultimately, it's a pretty passive program for people to experience. So you could set up something like this for your own library website, or even print out some of those handouts through the data detox kit and place them near your computer workstations as a way to start introducing these ideas to your patrons. You can also use active workshops where you can partner with someone such as a privacy analyst at a university to come and talk about digital and data privacy. That data detox kit also has workshops and that go through step by step, even with time suggestions to work through those, that you can start rather than building something from the ground up. You can pull out from some of the work that's already being done through other people. And then this last one with one-to-one interactions create kind of demands a lot more metacognition on you as the librarian in how you interact with patrons. So if somebody is needing help on a website and or you're demonstrating how to work through a site on your own computer, going through and declining cookies or doing that extra step of selecting which cookies to share and saying out loud why you're taking that extra step is one way of modeling the same digital privacy practices that we want to see throughout the world, so that there's less of that data exhausts. See a question from Lisa. Do you know of any movement in the library world that promotes purchasing print books for privacy purposes? I feel digital privacy in public libraries is basically DOA. Is that dead or alive? Did you clarify? And then if patrons have access to print, that is truly dead on arrival. Thank you, Lisa. Patrons have access to print, that is truly the only way that they can hope to keep info private, especially applicable to sensitive topics, financial, medical, legal. Yeah, so I'm not sure about any, how do I put this? Any like collaborative efforts in a like movement of folks in the library world. But that is definitely something to consider moving towards, which is then again, we're talking about kind of some of the cost and benefits of doing that. So I know currently at my library, purchase requests that come through are automatically done for ebooks. And so if we're going more towards ebooks because they're less expensive and easier to purchase, that's coming at some of the expense of our privacy. And so I think if you're working on collections, to consider collections about sensitive topics, such as medical and legal ideas, to make sure that you're buying print versions of them as well, so people who are dealing with sensitive information can have that privacy ensured. Let's see. Aaron, I'm finding younger people, Gen Z and younger, don't have concerns about privacy. They know their data can be collected and sold, and they seem to have already given up on trying to protect any semblance of privacy. Have you also encountered that with students or others? What's your response? Yes, I've definitely experienced that, both within myself and seen patrons have that like, well, everything's being collected, no matter what. And just having that conversation of, well, there are things that you can do to mitigate things or to make it harder or to kind of break the system a little bit. So my favorite one to point out, I think, is privacy badger. Okay, I use the two of them in conjunction with each other. One of them specifically says don't track anything. And then the other one gives wrong information. So it replaces some of the cookie information with stuff that is not relevant to you. So it degrades the value of that data that's being brokered and put in. So that's why sometimes my targeted ads are way off. They have me as a different gender, at a different age group. So there's stuff that you can do to kind of mess with the system rather than acquiesce to like, well, nothing I do matters that much. This is kind of a empowerment through understanding how the systems work in that. See, I'm looking through. Ooh. All right, looking in the Q&A, an anonymous attendee asks, we can physically cover our camera on our phones, but is there any way to truly have our microphones protected? Even though you might have the microphone setting as off, is it still possible to be accessed? If so, is there anything else to do? Same question for health centers that track heart rate. Oh, nope, I did not talk about this in my talk. Yeah, so again, this is kind of tricky because it comes down to a certain level of trust in the settings and the systems. But so there's some, yeah, definitely issues with the microphone because there's no way of turning that or completely muffling it. But so there's that sense that if you have the settings off, you've done about as much as you can. And my collaborator, AJ Gmuzel, points out that even when you're on websites that say your cookie preferences, she actually has a legal background as well, and say that they're just preferences. So they're under no obligation to actually adhere to those preferences. But by taking that extra effort to say, no, I do not consent to this, there is a paper trail. There is data that says, do you actually said you didn't want this? And if they did it anyway, then that goes against what they're saying. And so it creates a sense of they might be getting your data anyway, but if a lawsuit ever comes to fruition, you have done your part in pointing out that they're not doing what they're saying they're doing. So that's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a bummer to think about that in that way. But if you're empowered to do as much as you possibly can, then at least you can say that you're trying, which I don't know about you, but makes me feel a little bit better to say, well, I'm trying to actually protect myself and people around me as well. Because so this is kind of anecdotal and related to the whole microphone thing, is a lot of people will say like, oh, they're listening to my conversations with people, the mysterious they. Because I just had this conversation with this one person about switching brands of toothpaste, and then all of a sudden I'm getting ads for this toothpaste. So they must be hearing me, right? Well, it's actually a little bit more complicated, and in my personal opinion, a little bit scarier, in that, no, they didn't actually necessarily hear your conversation, but if the person who just bought that new toothpaste used their Target Red card or their Kroger card, then there's a record of them purchasing that. And then if that conversation happened where you're both holding your phones, then there's data that says you two were in the same place at the same time, and they just recently did this. So that means that there's a chance that it came up in conversation, or that person at least has some sphere of influence over you. And so then they'll start giving you ads based off of what that other person recently did, as a kind of a sphere of influence and proximity thing. So it's using your location data and your purchase history to create that kind of sense. So sometimes it's not actually the microphone, but rather some pretty alarmingly accurate inferences that can be made about your metadata, which is why this some of your data exhaust is so valuable, is because if you have enough data points about a group of people, then you can start to make inferences about what might be happening within that group and help. Yes, Ruth. So Ruth says, like, when Target knew a girl was pregnant before she did, that was actually a really interesting case because they started getting coupons for prenatal things before the pregnancy test came back, based off of other purchases. And along with that, if that person also had a menstruation app that tracked their cycle, and the app was showing that there were some irregularities there, that's another data point that can be moved into there. I believe it's the data detox kit talks about how to use cycle tracking apps, and how or why you may or may not want to as well. That's politically relevant to today. All right. Yeah.
So a lot of,
Yeah. Go ahead, George.
just a lot of great conversation, a lot of great questions. I just want to let everyone know I did drop the LEU request form in the chat. So if you do need that, as we're getting close to 11, feel free to fill that out. And we'll go ahead and wrap up.
All right. So that was a good reminder to move to the next slide and say my thank yous. So I want to thank George. He reached out to me after I gave a lightning talk about the same topic for the Midwest Business Librarian Summit last summer, which was definitely an encouragement to continue with this work. I want to thank Jack Kowaleski at Monroe County Public Library, AJ Gmusel at UIUC and IU Bloomington. And then I also want to thank my home institution, Indiana University Libraries, for allowing me to explore these kinds of topics and talk about it as much as I would like to get a more informed public and user base. And also thank all of you for showing up. That was very exciting.